Ben Mallah owns a waterfront Mediterranean mansion in Tampa Bay that he is selling for $35 million. He also owns the kind of strip mall where the check cashing place never closes and the payday loan window opens at 7 in the morning. Both are part of the same business. That is not a contradiction. That is the model. The empire is built on what Mallah calls necessity real estate, retail and residential assets that the internet cannot touch. You cannot download a roof over your head. You cannot stream a grocery store into a food desert. The physical setup of survival does not go out of business. And Ben Mallah, a man who has spent decades in the game, heavy build, Brooklyn accent, built a fortune by understanding that before almost anyone else did. The entry point is what he calls the Decay Gap. Institutional investors, the pension funds, the REITs, which are basically giant companies that own sets of buildings, the firms with compliance departments and quarterly reports. They walk away from distressed assets because the unpredictability looks too ugly on a spreadsheet. Mallah walks toward them. He buys at auction, at the bottom, at the moment when everyone else has decided the asset is too broken to touch. The gap between what a distressed property costs and what it is worth to the person who has nowhere else to go. That gap is his inventory. The philosophy has a name inside his operation: the essential monopoly. Own the actual buildings for services people cannot skip. Not luxury, not optional. The laundromat in the neighborhood with no car access. The retail strip anchored by the dollar store in the zip code the big chains abandoned. When you own the only option, you do not compete. You collect. The tenant has no leverage. The customer has no alternative. The rent gets paid because the alternative is the street. This is not a real estate business. It is a market in human necessity, engineered to extract maximum value from minimum alternatives. The decay gap is the acquisition strategy. The essential monopoly is the retention strategy. And the person who cannot afford to leave is not a tenant. They are the asset. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, most investors froze. The credit lines closed, the institutional money pulled back, and the distressed property market became a graveyard that nobody wanted to walk through. Ben Mallah walked through it with a checkbook. He accepted whatever private interest rate the market demanded. Double digits, punishing terms, rates that would make a conventional lender flinch. The cost of the money did not matter. What mattered was that he was the only buyer in the room. Here is what he did with those properties once he had them. He fixed them just enough. Not enough to make them good, enough to make them leasable. A new coat of paint over the water damage. A patched roof that passes inspection, but will need replacing in 4 years. The electrical panel updated to code minimum, nothing beyond. This is not renovation. This is the science of the threshold. Finding the exact point where a building stops being condemned and starts generating rent. The tenant moves in. The clock starts. The building keeps decaying. The clearest example of how this works sits on the waterfront at Johns Pass Village in Madeira Beach, Florida. Equity Management Partners Incorporated, Mallah's operating company, acquired the property for $17.2 million. That was the bargain price, because every big firm had already decided the asset was too broken to touch. Mallah touched it. He ran the Decay Gap playbook on a waterfront address, and the gap between what the market thought the property was worth and what he knew it could become, that gap was the entire business. By 2026, that same Johns Pass property carried a revaluation of $43 million. Not because the building was transformed, not because a new structure replaced the old one, The revaluation is not a reward for construction. It is a reward for patience and a tolerance for conditions that drove every other buyer out of the room. Gone. And the gap between what he paid and what it is now worth did not come from labor. It came from the willingness to own something that nobody else would touch. This is the three-part machine. You buy at the bottom using expensive private capital because the cost of the money is irrelevant if the asset appreciation is large enough. You restore to the minimum threshold, not to quality, to compliance. And then you hold while the revaluation does the work, turning $17.2 million into a number 2.5 times larger without a single structural transformation of the underlying asset. The building did not improve. The spreadsheet did. And somewhere inside that gap, between the condemned and the compliant, between the auction price and the revaluation, a tenant is paying rent on a building that was fixed just enough to take their money. In February 2025, a federal court in the Middle District of Florida dismissed a lawsuit filed under Case 824 CV 2904. The plaintiff was Ben Mallah. The subject of the lawsuit was not a tenant dispute, not a zoning challenge, not a regulatory fight over one of his distressed properties. He sued over 3 luxury cars destroyed by floodwater. A man who built $250 million on the premise that distressed assets are an opportunity, took his own flood-damaged property to federal court and lost. Think about the architecture of that decision for one moment. The same philosophy that says a flooded building in someone else's neighborhood is a buying opportunity. That philosophy did not extend to his own garage. When the water came for his cars, it was not a market signal. It was a personal injury. The decay gap is a tool when the distressed asset belongs to someone who cannot fight back. When the distressed asset is yours, you call a lawyer. The court dismissed the case. Full stop. As of 2026, his estate is valued at $35 million, more than double what he paid for it. Not rented, not minimally restored and leased to a tenant with nowhere else to go. Listed, for sale, to a buyer who has every alternative in the world and is choosing this address because they want it. The asking price is the distance between what the system extracts from the people inside it and what it delivers to the man who owns it. $35 million. That is the exit. You are somewhere inside this system right now. Not as an investor, as the bones. The laundromat you use because it is the only one in your zip code. The check cashing outlet your neighbor uses because the bank closed its branch 3 years ago. The rental unit where the ceiling leaks and the maintenance request sits unanswered because the lease runs for another 8 months and leaving costs more than staying. The necessity real estate empire described earlier is not an abstraction. It is the physical address where your daily life happens, and the rent you pay there is the raw material of someone else's $35 million exit. This is what the machine produces. A federal lawsuit over luxury cars on one end, a tenant with a bucket under a leaking ceiling on the other, and in between, a massive profit on a waterfront mansion, extracted not from construction, not from transformation, but from the simple fact that some people have no alternative, and some people own the only alternative there is. The building did not improve. The portfolio did. If you want to understand every distressed neighborhood in your city, every shuttered block, every necessity-only commercial strip, every zip code the institutional money abandoned, you are watching the same machine run the same play. Subscribe to Leviathan Files. The audit never stops.